Absolutely.
Okay. I've always been fascinated by Gordon Ramsay. Ever since I first saw the documentary Boiling Point, which followed Gordon in the months, I think, preceding his first restaurant opening, which was at Royal Hospital Road in Chelsea, London. I was really struck by his intensity and his work ethic and ambition for perfection, how he spoke to the chefs, which he calls his brigade, how he talked to the customers, the respect he had for the proprietors of the restaurants, and then the fashion in which he balls out anyone whom he feels is like slacking or not taking the job seriously. And he also had this acute awareness of what it is to be a success or a failure. And as far as I can make out, Gordon Ramsay is a man who is utterly consistent in his standards of operating a restaurant and also his expectations of himself and the people around him, his colleagues. He's like a man who leads from example. And I dare say that many cooks and like dining room staff have like fallen foul of these expectations and not had the minerals to accept his criticisms and improve and go on the journey of, you might say, culinary excellence with him. But I know that talking with you, Mike, entangled in Gordon's behaviours, you see something extra, something that relates to this era and is connected to critical race theory, which I'm fascinated to hear. Can you explain to us what it is you see?
Sure. So to begin with, I had watched Kitchen Nightmares years ago when it was actually in circulation, and I always found it interesting. Before I got into computers, I used to work in food service. I used to work in kitchens, and so it was something of the joy of recognition. That was a lot of fun to watch. Mm-hmm. And it was also fun to watch him kind of take the starch out of people who maybe thought too much of themselves, and these business owners who were kind of breathing their own exhaust fumes too much and had lost the plot, so to speak. All right. So that was a fun show to watch, and on one level. But then more recently, for some reason, I started watching that again on my YouTube feed. Like they started coming up in my YouTube feed. So I'm watching these shows again, but this time in the light of my current politics, right? In the light of how I'm thinking about politics and how I'm thinking about life. Mm-hmm. And in the light of Foundationism, which we can drill into later if you want. But long story short, even back then when I'd watched Kitchen Nightmares, I was aware that there was a pattern to how he was working, right? There were certain things that he would always instruct people to do. If the kitchen wasn't clean, he'd always say, we got to clean this kitchen. He would almost always simplify the menu, right? It's like, you're cooking too many things, pare this down. He would almost always focus on things like the communication between the chef and the rest of the kitchen staff. He would, there were certain things that he would always do that would kind of, that meant that if the people followed his advice, they'd at least have a shot. They wouldn't necessarily, restaurants tend to fail at very high rates to begin with. But the thrust of the show to me seemed to be that there are these patterns with which you have to align yourself if you even want to have a shot, right? So lately, when I've been looking at this thing, I've been struck by a few things. One is that everyone tends to push back at first. That's the first thing, right? Yeah. All the restaurant owners, or the restaurateurs, all the chefs, if the chefs, come in line for a tongue lashing from Ramsay, they all kind of push back at first, or just about all of them. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of come around later. So what that tells me is that the kind of being defensive about your situation, even in a situation where you actually called the guy in to help you in the first place, right? That's a natural human thing. Everyone does it, And the other thing I noticed was that, well, not noticed, but I suppose you could say that I started thinking to myself how much harder his job would have been to turn these failing restaurants around if the restaurant owners had had someone whispering in their ear something that sounded like critical race theory. In other words, imagine Ramsay comes in, he says, your menu's too big, you got to pare it down. You're not communicating with your staff well enough. You need to up your game in terms of fresh sauces versus sauces from a bag, or entrees from a box, or what have frozen, fresh versus frozen, what have you.
Yeah.
And now imagine if someone had been whispering into the restaurant owner's ear, hey, listen, this Ramsay guy, he really doesn't understand the kind of the historical nature of these kinds of restaurants and the power structures that are involved, the reason why all your sauces come out of a bag, and the reason why it takes half an hour for someone's appetizer to come out of the kitchen. He doesn't understand all that. He's everything's fine. You keep on going as you go. This is actually those two ideas, right? The idea that it's universal to push back and be defensive, and the idea that everyone needs to up their game, kind of sum up my big problem with the hollowness and sterility about, or I should say the hollowness and sterility of how we talk about race. Critical race theory is obvious nonsense, but the way we talk about it is also a problem, and the way we try to convince people to go another way is also a problem. So I'll pause there. We can dig it. We can kind of take any direction you like, but that's to sum it up. Gordon Ramsay gives the lie to critical race theory, right? What Gordon Ramsay says about restaurants is true about life. Like there are very many avenues in life where you are likely to fail. Very many people fail. They fail with a little bit of money. They fail with a lot of money. They fail when they're wearing a black skin. They fail when they're wearing a white skin. They fail because failure is baked into the nature of things. We are embarked on a risky enterprise. And the thing is that if you have racism is real, sexism is real, all the isms are real, but nonetheless you have to get yourself together and execute. Period. No excuses. So I'll pause.
So maybe you could walk us through what you think the link is to Foundationism, and perhaps give us a little bit of a Foundationism 101 first.
Sure. Let me just pull up. I'll pull up the Foundationist Manifesto right now. So first of all, what is Foundationism? Foundationism is I suppose you could say it's a political movement that I founded a few years ago when I had left the left. I was disgusted with the excesses of the left, with the hollowness of the left, with the wrongness of their ideas, with their self-satisfaction, with their street theater, with the emptiness of all these protests that I saw. I mean, I think Occupy Wall Street was really the thing that started to one of the big watershed moments where I said, this is a real problem. But I was also disgusted with the right. Right. I was also disgusted with kind of its apparent abandonment of actual conservative principles. Right. With its kind of with the hollowness of its embrace of materialism. It struck me that you had the left wing in American politics, which was kind of classically Marxist materialist, but it wasn't much better on the right, where you had kind of capitalist materialism, right? Yes, capitalism is functionally a better pattern for organizing societies, organizing economies than Marxism. But if the ultimate aim is a kind of materialism, then we're still nowhere. So anyway, I knew that I didn't want to embrace necessarily the right wholeheartedly, but I knew the left was no place for me. So I just had to start my own thing. So foundationism. And the idea being that the one thing we have in common is the ground on which we stand, the foundation on which we have to build things and rebuild things. Right. And so you can see when you walk into a building, where is the foundation to the left of you or to the right? Neither. It's underneath you. And because my dad worked in the construction trades and because he literally used to pour foundations for a living, and because I'm a science fiction geek and I've had read Isaac Asimov, Foundationism was the name I chose. So it is the Foundationism is the politics of people who build things and who are interested in building things. Right. And it's the foundation. It's the philosophy of people who are interested in getting to the bottom of things, for actual radicals, right, who want to get to the root of things. What is society? What is society for? Right. And that's the thing in conversations I have with other foundationists. We talk in those terms all the time. Well, we're talking about the economy. Well, okay, the economy is doing this now. What is the economy for? What is this thing for? Because it does us no good to try to repair the many broken institutions in our societies. We don't think hard about what those institutions are for. And it's easy to forget. Most things you experience every day that kind of work well enough, you forget they exist. And that can be okay. But when things are in crisis, you have to step back, get some perspective, and ask yourself what things are for. So Foundationism has a manifesto. The manifesto is: see deeply, listen closely, reason honestly, speak clearly, act bravely, deny the self, defend the individual, respect tradition, face the present, and cultivate the future. That's the manifesto, right? So, yeah, I'll pause there, but I definitely see that Gordon Ramsay, whether he knows it or not, is a foundationist to the core in his approach and in his way of going about things.
Interesting. Let me move the conversation slightly into the realms of leadership and see if we can establish some links between the likes of Gordon Ramsay, leaders like Gordon Ramsay, and other characters with foundationism, because there might be a common thread here with people that act and interact as does Gordon with the world, and the principles of foundationism. I was talking with my cousin last week. He's a general builder and a site chippy, which chippy is English slang for carpenter. Mm-hmm. And I know he likes to watch Gordon Ramsay's shows. Excuse me. And I asked for his thoughts. And he says that the best building sites, the places where you learn the most about your trade and also yourself, he said places where you become not only a professional but a grown-up, are the sites where the leading characters such as Gordon are abound. They're around the place. And he told me that for him, you can't take criticism personally at work, because to be at work, he says, is to be learning, and to learn is to listen. And if you make the effort to listen, then you are not going to hear good things about yourself 100% of the time. And right. He says, and if you do, then you're either perfect, which you're not, or interestingly, it's interesting that I was talking to a builder here, and we've already made that link. Yeah. He says that your boss is probably too weak to confront the failings of the employee.
There you go.
And he also reckons that the firms that are soft on their employees are the worst to work alongside with on site. He says it sickens him when he sees a gang of builders taking the piss out of their boss, and not paying proper respect to their paycheck. And listening to him, I thought this is true. To go easy on an employee is a betrayal to the obligation of leadership almost. It's a betrayal which is universal, because no one wins in the end.
Correct.
Neither the apprentice or the person that should be leading them into professionalism and the resultant successes that you get from that. And this brought me to consider that there is something potently like aphoristic in cliches like cruel to be kind and tough love. sayings like this endure in our language because they help us accept comments that can be uncomfortable for the person that says them and uncomfortable for the person that it needs to be said to. But there's a sticking point, isn't there? Which is that in our era, the increasing inertia of the PC and the woke movement, it seems to be working to strip our language of these established precepts. So let me ask you, do you have the same sense of this layer of cultural erosion? And if you do, what's the next layer to be chipped away at?
Wow, that's a great question. And yeah, that really resonates about building sites, because that's another one of the jobs I had when I was living in Baltimore before I got into computers and moved back to New York. It's like I ended up working for a construction company. And what's funny is, I remember, the first couple weeks at work, you're the little man on the totem pole, man. You get every bad job there is on the site. You're just running around doing everything. And if you execute wrong, they will call you everything but a child of God. And if you can't take it, that's your business. You got to go. And restaurant kitchens, same thing.
Yeah.
So so we're talking about cultural erosion. I think cultural erosion is a separate thing. I think we're talking about spiritual erosion. That is to say, I think that the spirit in people that seeks excellence, the spirit in people that understands that it needs to strive, I think that spirit has been eroded. And it's a weird, here's a paradox for you, right? A contradictory mental image. It's been eroded by softness, right?
Yes.
Because I'm going to jump around a little bit. I think I told you, I messaged you in the Foundationist chat about this painting by this Frenchman. I can't remember his name now, but it was the Trojan. It's a painting of the Trojan women burning the fleet, right? And they go back down to the beach, and after the Trojans have landed somewhere, and they set the ships on fire because they're like, we're done. We don't want to do any more wandering. This is it. Let's put down sticks here. Mm-hmm. That iconography of burning one's fleet on the beach behind you is somewhat common in history, right? And I think it speaks to something common in human beings, which is that if we have an out, we'll take it. If you give someone an out, that they're likely to take it. And so it's not surprising, people want to kind of maximize their ease, and certain things hurt, right? When your beliefs are shown to be wrong, that hurts. That's really a feeling. Guys who write software for a living, like I do, know what I'm talking about. Like the feeling you get when you're trying to debug a piece of software and it's like not working. You try something else, that's not working. Like it's that feeling of just being wrong. Debugging software is a process in which you test, some large number of hypotheses, all but the last of which are wrong. And that's not a good feeling. And if you can avoid that feeling, you will. The problem is that the only way to avoid the feeling of being wrong is getting to the right answer. Well, you can do that, or you can just avoid thinking about things at all, and then you never have to deal with it. So if you soften everything so that nothing is right or wrong, then you never have to feel that you're wrong. You never have to feel it as if you've been contradicted, and it's wonderful, right? But then you're not very useful as a human being, because there's all these fields of endeavor where correctness actually matters. And so that's a problem in our culture right now, is that we have, especially with young people who are still forming, they're still making themselves. Their egos are oversized and fragile at the same time. They need to be shown that they're wrong about a lot of things because they are wrong about a lot of things. But it so happens that we also have this competing impulse to kind of jump in front of young people, to jump between young people and the idea and say, hey, you don't have to listen to that. You don't have to have someone tell you you're wrong about something. You deserve better than that. This kind of thing. You don't have to listen to someone talk about history if history is unpleasant for you. And so you get this, and we can go into the whole thing of postmodernism, whatever. But I want to pull it back to leadership, right? Because you mentioned leadership, and I'm talking about young people, because I think that the educational system is where this virus, the virus of post-structuralism, postmodernism, critical race theory, critical gender theory, feminism, those toxic elements, that's where they've hit ground zero, and that's where they're propagating out from and have been propagating out from, and that's where the long march through our institutions started. So that's where we got to look. And leadership is relevant in that context, because an educator is by definition a kind of a leader, someone who is now in the case of higher education, or quote unquote what we think of as formal education, that person is leading in a classroom scenario. Of course, the senior guy on a job site who's showing you how to do something, or who's got you following him around, like watching what he's doing, he's also a teacher, and therefore he's also a leader, right? And the problem is that we can't education, the process by which society, by which civilization propagates itself forward in time, cannot happen without pain and without damage and without hurt, because that's what it means to learn something. It means that the part of you that thought something incorrect, that part of you had to die, right? And your bad ideas, your ideas that will not work, your ideas that if applied to building a house or building an airplane or building a bridge, those ideas that if applied to those things would get everybody killed, those ideas have to go. Okay? And so it is the leadership. Young people, I think, in every age have always had big revolutionary ideas. Young people always are kind of arrogant and cocky and want to go. I mean, that's an age appropriate thing. It is the job of education generally, schools, parents, you name it, job site supervisors, whoever. It's the job of education to kind of take that impulse, okay, and shape it and channel it, and not just give it its head and let it run wild, okay? I'm always saying that some amount of time ago in this country, your country too, most likely, when young people with big ideas got to college, that was when someone would say to them, essentially, listen, welcome. Take these 10 books and go and read them because you don't know anything. When you're done with these 10 books, I have 10 more books for you because you still won't know anything. And after we do that cycle a few times, then we can have a conversation about why you're still wrong about everything. Because by that time, hopefully, your bad ideas will have risen to the dignity of error. Okay. It's like, now go away. Okay. That was kind of the spirit of education, not welcome, our valued customer. What can we do for you? That's not education. That's service. And while it's true that you are doing someone a service by educating them, okay, you can't get a handle on the thing if you approach it as a customer service problem. It's not. Right? And that's the problem. And it's especially a problem with young Black people who have read enough history to be indignant, okay? Have read enough history to know that, hey, this and this happened to such and such, and my people, so to speak. It's especially a problem for people who have, how can I say, well, we're talking about identity, right? So it's almost as if we've set up all these conditions where the natural pridefulness of young people is a constant, but it needs to go somewhere. This is a similar, as I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but as I'm thinking about it,
No,
it's the
it's fine.
same kind of thing with religion. And we say the religion has declined in Western society. Well, it hasn't really. Christianity has declined in Western society. Religion is what you get in any case. And we have just chosen to lodge our religious belief in places that are not good for us. We've chosen to worship dead, hollow gods, okay, that are in some cases worse than hollow, okay? But religion is what you get in any case. Now, the pridefulness of young people that's a thing. That's not going to go. You don't want to destroy that pride. You have to channel it somewhere. Now, ordinarily, your pride would be in your work, okay? That's true of whether you're a carpenter, right, a chippy, right, whether you're an academic, a philosopher, or a musician, whatever. It's like you're supposed to. There's some sense that your pride is in your work. What happens when you are infected by the mind virus of thoughtful thoughtlessness, and universal meaninglessness? Okay, what happens is that your pride has to go somewhere. Where does it go? Well, in the case of too many young people, it goes to so-called identity. My so-called race, my so-called, like I'm so-called black person, I'm a so-called white person. It goes into that because it's got to go somewhere. So you're not giving young people any place to lodge that pride, anything to be proud of. It gets worse. Young people go to college or they go to trade school, they do whatever, they get out. What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to work. We derive our sense of ourselves from society and from work. We are social creatures in that sense. Okay. So now people already tend to live in big cities, which are relatively anonymous. It's more difficult to have social relationships. Okay. You don't grow up among people who have known you and your family for generations. That's one problem. There's no such thing as lifetime employment. That's another problem. And then even the heart of civilization, the core of civilization, the fire at the center of it, which is the family and the home, the married family in the home. If you can't afford to buy a home, okay, and you have no real prospect of getting a home, even if you've done all the correct things that you're supposed to do, okay, then you don't even have that kind of fortress into which you can retreat and be proud of your home and your family and have people who rightly look up to you, okay? That's a problem. And what it means is that those impulses don't go away. They don't disappear. They are lodged in other places. And so for me to think I'm a black man, I do happen to think I cut a very fine figure in my black skin. But the fact is that I'm proud of my work. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. My skin is just it's a detail. What I'm proud of is my work. Okay. And because I'm proud of my work, it's like at the end of the day, it can be about the work and the criticism. I can shrug off criticism of me, or I can shrug off whatever kind of comment, as long as at the end of the day, where I'm doing good work and I'm trying to be a better craftsman. And that's something that we have to get back to. And that's something that going back to Gordon Ramsay, that's something at the end of the day, that's what he's always focused. You'll even hear him say, where's your self-respect? Like, why are you serving, talking to somebody like, why are you serving this shit to customers? What's the matter with you? Where's your pride? Where's your self-respect? He's talking about the work. He's not talking about the fact that you're this or that, or you're straight, or you're black, or you're white, or you're lesbian, or whatever. So he doesn't care about all that shit. It's like, where's your pride? What are you doing here? Why are you? And the other thing, going back to foundationism and us always asking kind of what things are for, you'll hear him say that too. You'll hear him say, why are you running a restaurant? Why did you start this? Why are you really doing? Are you sure you want to be doing this? So anyway, that was kind of rambling. I'll pause, but that's I hope I got at least I hope I hit kind of in the blast radius of your question.
Yeah, you did. I've got some more thoughts on leadership, but hearing you talk then, it puts me in mind of 3 naive and ultimately fruitless words, and I'm going to guess that you're not a fan of what I'm about to say. The three words are universal basic income.
Oh, Jesus.
Emojis.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's...
Thank you, Andrew Yang. Thank you very much.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Yeah. So here's an interesting thing. So Milton Friedman, who's, famous libertarian, kind of like the brains behind the Reagan Revolution here in the U.S., the late Milton Friedman, was definitely no fan of the nanny state, definitely no fan of the welfare state. I mean, he was definitely he was on side in terms of understanding how poisonous those things were. He proposed something that he called a negative income tax, which in some sense is like a universal basic income. But I think his thought was that it would start, you would really, his thought about the negative income tax is that it would be something to break the stranglehold of the welfare state on people, rather than just handing money out to able-bodied young people who could otherwise be working and who, and maybe even were childless. It's like, why are you giving people money? So here's, you see, part of this is why Foundationism has been a great comfort to me over the past couple of years, because I think the proper way to address something like that is to pull back a little bit. Right? We're talking about using universal basic income, and typically, we derive income from work. So the first question is, what is work for? That's the first question. It's like, what is work for? What is income for? What is money for? Right? Because if we know what work is for, then we have some sense of whether it's really optional. Okay. Human beings, I read this quote a while ago and I think it's sound. Human beings are the only species with a less than 100% employment rate. And that's a problem. Now, how to solve that problem, I don't know. But there's a sense in which we do need to address how our economies are structured, and how is it that we can afford to throw away that much human talent, right? But what is work for? And then what is income for? What is money for? Right? See, I think that people don't just, that work isn't just for making money, right? Work is something else. Work is something that we need, right? And so I'm obviously not a fan of kind of papering over. If that's a deficit, if young people can't find work, for example, then that's a problem. I don't think we don't do ourselves any good by papering that over by saying, okay, just here's some money. I get this sense from watching politics in your country, watching your prime minister talk about giving people money, talk about whatever, the furloughing scheme, whatever kind of thing, talking about it as if he doesn't understand what work is for.
Yep.
Like he thinks work is just that so you can eat, right? And so, well, no, what about if we just give you the food? Then you don't need to work. That's the level of thinking. Well, of course, that's a problem. But then, look, I don't want to even get started with the problems with these kind of government functionaries who themselves, most of them have never had a real job, and who mostly don't even understand what money is, much less what it's for. But long story short,
they understand it from a different angle.
I would say they don't understand. They analyze it from a different angle.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as understanding it. Yeah. They look at it from a different angle. So yeah, long story short, universal basic income. If you can tell me what work is for, then we can start to have a real conversation about that. That would be my automatic response. Well, first tell me what work is for, because income is something that typically derives from you working. So you're saying that people should get an income because what now? And then, well, if they can't find work, okay, what is work for? And then what is income for? And then we can have a real conversation about it. But that's right now we're engaged in this kind of Marxist materialist exercise right? Of just like, well, as long as people have enough calories and enough objects around them, everything will be fine. No, I'm sorry, no, that's wrong. Okay.
How have they come to this, arrived at this equation? How have people arrived at this equation? Have they not felt a sense of achievement in the face of any kind of adversity, or moving from not knowing how to do something, from learning how to do something, then being semi-proficient, then being proficient, and people telling you you're good at that? Do they not understand these sensations?
I
thought they were universal.
I think they are probably not universal. I think we have a few problems. One problem is that there's too much government. And because there's too much government, there are too many places where mediocre people can kind of hide but still be very influential. And because the government is too big, it has too much bureaucrats who might otherwise live a life of kind of joyous anonymity and irrelevance, are painfully relevant because they can actually make decisions about people's lives that not very long ago no one would have tolerated. That's one problem. I mean, the idea that the idea that a Matt Hancock thinks that he can kind of close down churches, the idea that he feels that he can say any of the things he says, as a functionary of your government. I mean, it's just a testament to how hollow society itself has become, how unafraid of the people. Yes. Unfortunately, the government is. Okay, so, but going back to your question, I don't want to ramble too much. How did they get to that point? I think one idea, I've been wrestling with this question. I think maybe one problem is over-specialization. I think that as I was talking with a friend of mine in the Foundationist chat about this, and the kind of the phrase that came to my mind is that we've been asking people we've been looking at people who know almost nothing and expecting them to tell us about almost everything. This is true of journalists. It's true of politicians. Mm-hmm. Now, it is inevitable that people's field of vision becomes narrower as they become more specialized. And specialization is just what you get with civilization. And that is almost the point of civilization, right? You become civilized when everyone doesn't have to do everything. Everyone doesn't have to pick up a weapon and guard the perimeter and grow food and chase down animals and all this. But, it's like we specialize, and that's fine. But the problem is over-specialization leads to an atrophying of certain mental faculties, which it's helpful to have. Now, that by itself may not necessarily be a bad thing. A bureaucrat is a highly specialized creature. But then, for God's sake, if you're going to have a kind of a cast of highly specialized creatures, don't let them make so many consequential decisions in the lives of ordinary people. Like, just don't. And that's the problem with, so you have to have government. I'm not a libertarian. I don't think government is evil necessarily. It can be, but it's not necessarily evil. It's not necessarily bad. The problem is that it's too big, one, and even more importantly, we have forgotten what government is for. And that's a problem. Okay. And of course, on the other side, since I mentioned libertarians, the problem with libertarians, the problem I have with libertarians is that they have forgotten what liberty is for, what liberty is for, what its purpose is, what its right purpose is. And that's a problem because mere libertarianism is one of the things that has gotten us into this situation. I mean, Boris Johnson himself is a kind of a libertarian, and it's not necessarily that he's even insincere as a libertarian. It's just that he doesn't have his principles aren't that closely held because he has no idea what liberty is for. None. Right? He hasn't thought about it. Right? So much less having thought what government is for. So we have to, so much of society has been hollowed out, so much of our institutions, but it's the spirit in things that has been hollowed out. And I think the thing people, I know that, you started out with the theme of Gordon Ramsay. The thing people respond to, I think, is that here you have a man, whatever you think about him, whatever you think about his tactics, what have you, his rhetoric, the fact is that here's a man who goes into these places where you can tell that at some level or other, the spirit has fled from the place. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's a sense in which you have to relight that fire. Okay. And that's always going to be a dangerous process. It's always going to be something that might make you jump back, because that's what it is to strike to make a fire. Okay. And there's just no way around that. Now, of course, you can't let the fire get out of control. Fire is a great servant, but a terrible master. But the fact is, you have to have the courage to light a fire in a dark place. In the first place, you have to do that. Right. And then once you light that fire, right, then you're not just in comfortable darkness. Now certain things are illuminated. Now you have to look at those things. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to actually look at the things that are illuminated now that the fire has, because it might look like things are actually getting worse. If you're in a dark room, you have all kinds of bad stuff around. Then you strike a light. Now you can see everything that's bad. Whoa, this is not an improvement. Well, it is an improvement, because now you know. It's better to know. It's better to look at things, to face things. And here's the thing: facing things is a skill. It takes practice. And the good news is it's like a muscle. Like it gets stronger the more you use it. But we have to get used to facing things again. We have to get used to asking what things are for again. We have to get used to that fire, the heat of it, the kind of when it flares up and whoa, it's going to keep you warm, but watch out, right? That dichotomy, this thing can burn you, but it sustains you. And we have to do that, because the alternative is to go down the line of the critical race theory people and the gender studies people and the feminists and all the I refuse to call them politically correct, because there's nothing correct about it, but you know what I mean. The people who want to take all they want to file off all the sharp edges from everything, right? But the problem is the things without sharp edges, in the most primordial kind of human sense, are not useful as tools or weapons. You see what I'm saying? There's a sense in which the danger in something is the thing that makes it useful. Just like the danger in man is what makes him useful. Okay. And it is not at all apparent to me. In fact, the opposite is apparent, that you can just, remove the dangerousness from man and have him still be a proper creature. Now he may be useful to someone else, and I think that's part of the problem. Big capital is all in on this stuff, right? Because perhaps big capital feels that men who have been unmanned by this softness might be useful to them. But there again, we come back to, well, what is a man for? What is a human being for? Is he just to be useful to an employer? Is he something else? And out of everything, or I should say, out of the answer to that question, everything else has to come. But much depends on that answer, and we have to, and that question itself, right? That's another thing that we have to face. So I'll pause.
Well, that what you've just said there, many things you've just said there, could relate to your answer to my next question. I'd like to jump back to talking about leadership and focusing on that a bit more. I was thinking that maybe the guiding principle, quite literally, of leadership is for the prospective leader to know where they're going themselves, before they can effectively lead other people. And if I think back to any leader that I've been inspired by, they've all had this air of determination to reach something. They were all, in a way, like indivertible from their primary target. Now, sometimes the target wasn't one that particularly inspired me. I mean, I worked with an excellent man manager once whose driving force was simply to make money for the owner of the company. And he was very adept at organizing lots of staff to function at a level that provided wealth for a very few number of people. And I admit, undoubtedly, he was a dream employee for those who owned the business. But I couldn't help but think that his energies would be like better spent doing what he did for them, for himself a bit more. But maybe that's just the way I made up, and that's just a slight digression. But anyway, he had this elusive air of determination, which certainly galvanized the people around him. So I was going to ask you, where do you think this inner force emits from, and do you think it's innate or it can be switched on in any of us?
That's a great question. That's such a good question. I mean, that's such a good question that it's really a religious question.
Perhaps it is.
Yeah, and yeah, that's what yes.
Because what I'm trying to get at is the mindset of those that we spoke about a few minutes ago that have seemed to have ignored the sensation of achievement, and it can be a small achievement or a large achievement,
right.
And perhaps this inner force of determination comes with layering those sensations of achievement on top of each other until you get to the point where, you know, you have that air of determination.
Well, that's hard. I don't want to venture to. I've got to wrestle with that some more on my own. I don't know, but I would say this, that you mentioned layering. I think what's very interesting is that I've been wrestling a lot with the notion of hierarchy. Speaking of layers, right? Hierarchy, striving, pridefulness. The two kinds of pride, diabolic and symbolic.
Can you just outline that for us, please?
Sure. I mean, so diabolic pride. There's two types of pride: diabolic pride and symbolic pride. The type diabolic literally means that which divides. Mm-hmm. Symbolic means that which unites. So, the kind of pride that most Christians would agree is the king of sins is diabolic pride. It's okay to take pride, and in fact, it's a good thing to take pride in in a job well done, in your membership in some union or some guild or some professional organization or whatever, it's or your membership in a family, right? It's good to be proud of your family and to be proud that you have but because that is still kind of a pride. It's a pride that you feel, but it's a pride that is also bound up in a we, right? If I'm a craftsman, I make something, right? And I make something for someone else to use. I'm proud if I've made it well, and if the person likes it and they find it useful, and that pride again brings the other person in. That's a pride of where the concept of we is somehow involved. That's symbolic pride, and the fact that I made something with my hands and it's been useful in the world to someone else. That is a link, right? That symbolic link between me and the rest of society. The flip side is diabolic pride. Where it's like I'm just making my own things, and I just make these dark, angry paintings, and I never want to sell them because no one can understand me. It's like this. My paintings are too good for, and no one would buy them, and no one wants to buy them because they're just fools and peasants, and they don't understand me. That's a kind of diabolic pride, and that's no good. Okay, so I think.
What about if that person finds their own work beautiful?
Well, if they find it beautiful, but they're not necessarily putting themselves above anyone else, that's probably okay too. I mean, in other words, if I just,
right, got you.
You know what I'm saying? If you're not, it's that kind of core of resentment, and the sense of kind of,
or resentment is the ugliest one, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. In the sense of putting yourself apart from other people, as something superior to them, and there's a sense in which also, everyone has flaws. You try to fix your flaws, but if you're too diabolically proud, you It means to be diabolically proud is to be in denial about one's own flaws, which is why it's such a terrible sin, because it's a self-perpetuating sin. There's no way out of it. You know, there's no way out of it. It's just so. Anyway, going back to what you said, I think. Let me state it like this. I think we have to roll all the way back to thinking about the sacred human ideal. That's what I think. I think that, leadership, what does it mean to lead people? What does it mean to teach people? What does it mean to? It means different things in different circumstances. But in every case, the question, in order to be a good leader, right, to be a righteous leader, you must first believe in the sacred human ideal. There is no way otherwise. And by the sacred human, I mean it's that people are worth teaching because they are people, because there's something that, man is a sacred being, and therefore there is something to be respected in man, always. And however you get to that belief, that's a separate matter, and usually a private matter. But I really do believe that if I can put my finger on the number one problem, it's the loss in the belief of the sacred human ideal. Now, the problem, of course, is that, if it sounds like I'm saying that the problem is that's a religious problem. And I don't say that by way of calling people to Christ. I'm not qualified to call anyone to Christ. I myself am not a Christian. I'm a pilgrim. But the belief in the sacred human ideal, that must be at the core of every kind of human endeavor that we take seriously. You want to lead, you want to teach, you want to do good things in the world. Well, that only means something if it's built on the foundation of an idea of the sacred human ideal. And that idea is a supernatural idea. It's a supernatural ideal, right? It doesn't come from the world. It can't come from the world. Obviously not. Okay. Because nature doesn't care about human beings. Not at all. Okay. And other people may care about a specific human, but there's no political system that encodes the sacred human ideal in itself. Political systems may rest on that idea, but the idea must come from outside the system. Otherwise, why is the system, which is just a human creation anyway, worth anything? You see? So I think, that's a tough one. But I think a good place to start is, one's philosophy of things and one's philosophy of people. And I think we can argue all day about those things, and maybe we should argue all day about those things. But the problem, going back to my constant harping on why critical race theory is the devil, is that its philosophy of things is wrong, and its philosophy of people is wrong, and it doesn't believe in the sacred human ideal, and it tries to reduce things which are irreducible down to kind of mere, Marxist, worse than Marxist, kind of buckets of symbols and flows of material, from one person or from one institution to another. And so it's dead inside. It's worse than dead. And if we allow it to kind of infect us, then we'll be dead too.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Yes. Let me ask you a final question. Let's take it back to Gordon a bit. Leaders like Gordon are a modern HR, human resources nightmare. Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you think that such characters are still able to emerge from this treacle of wokeism and critical race theory that we find ourselves wading through?
Can such leaders emerge from this? Well, such leaders are still around, and they're still leading.
No, I don't mean people like Gordon are established. I mean the generation coming up.
Oh, I see what you mean.
The emergence of characters such as he.
Oh, yes. I mean, look, great leaders can and do emerge at any time. at all kinds of historical
Will the
junctures.
environment allow them?
The environment doesn't have anything to do with it. And here's why I say that. Because you see, ultimately what we're talking about here. So let's talk about, if we just take cancel culture for an example, right? Mm-hmm. So-called cancel culture. Now, you say, well, what is cancel culture? Well, that's when, someone says something controversial or that someone doesn't like, and then the person loses their job, for example, or they get a contract canceled or something. Someone, this person was going to do this, and now the company decided not to do it because a bunch of people on Twitter got mad. Okay, that's, so-called cancel culture. Now, what is cancel culture really? Okay, it is not a mob of people actually, lynching someone from a streetlight. It's not that. Okay. It's not the majority of the population getting up in arms because someone said something at the Grammy Awards or what have you. That's not what that is. Mm-hmm. What cancel culture really amounts to is a very noisy and very tiny minority of people making a lot of noise, usually on social media, and then a very small minority of people working in an institution like a corporation or a university, kowtowing to the noises they've made. That's cancel culture. It has nothing to do with the broad mass of the people. It has nothing to do with the kind of the real way people live their lives every day. These are mostly grad students, or undergrads, getting on Twitter and screaming about something, and then a company says, looks at that through the lens of whatever bubble they're sitting in, because to be that kind of leader is by definition to be in a kind of bubble. Okay, and then the person say, okay, well, yeah, I just, we're sorry that so and so and so and so. And this person has no place in da 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 da, right? And they'll issue some kind of statement that's very self-righteous and whatever, and they'll fire the person. Okay, but that's, I think one proper response for that is that clearly these are not companies we should work for if we can at all help it. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. A lot of people, it's like that's their only job, what have you. I get it, but what I'm saying is, cancel culture can only sustain itself because, one, labor is afraid to stand up to management, and two, management has forgotten what leadership is and what it's for.
Yeah.
Right. So we can do something. We can't do something about the second. That's management's business. They're either going to stand or fall, whatever. Right. But we can do something about the first. We can stand up to it. We can stand up to, people, guys like me, software developers working at some company. OK, and they're starting to go down some woke path of, insisting on, unconscious bias training. The answer is you can say no. Mm-hmm. Say no. I mean, I say software developers, anyone can say it, but guys like us especially, because why? Because it's relatively easy to get hired these days as a software developer. Like a lot of people need programmers, and the fact is most companies couldn't afford to lose even half of their programming staff. They would just walk out, It's like, but it requires us to stand up. And this is, the idea of leadership is one thing, but there's a sense in which there's a sense in which men who are worthy to be led, people who are worthy to be led, because you talked about, can leaders emerge? To me, the question is leaders will emerge always in any situation from any class of people who are worthy to be led. Teachers will emerge from any people who are worthy and ready to be taught. And what do I mean by worthy? I mean willing to stand up and say no. That's what I mean. I mean willing to face things, right? What does it mean to be ready to be? I mean, you're willing to face things, you're willing to face yourself. You're willing to discipline your emotions. You have virtue. In other words, you can govern your passions. Okay. And you can say no. You can walk out. It's like I say, hey, you work for this company, this and that. We're doing unconscious bias training because I think all the white people at this company really need to understand their whiteness. Yeah, the answer is no. Like I'm a black guy, and that shit makes me furious. Okay, the answer is no. My unconscious is none of your business.
Mm-hmm.
You don't like it? I don't know what to tell you. The answer is no. Oh, well, this and that, I work for this, we have, I'm sorry, you have to do this training, and the training is done. We've brought in Robin DiAngelo to tell you about your whiteness, and that. The answer is no. No. Now, what are you going to do about that? Now, one person does it, yeah, they might get fired. This is the other thing, man. I don't know what to tell you. We're going to have to be willing to take risks. We're going to have to be willing to take risks. If we're not willing to take risks, then we can't ask, we can't ask about leaders. We can, leadership is not even to the question, because if we're not willing to take risks anyway, then we're certainly not gonna listen to a leader who counsels us to take risks. If you're not willing to take risks, you're not going to listen to a teacher who teaches you how to do something risky, how to navigate risk. So forget about the leadership for a second. This is a matter of this again, back down the basic. Our basic humanity and our basic personhood that we have to stand up for and say, hey, man, no. The answer is no. Hey, well, this and that, and there's going to be some things, and you have to, there's going to be, trans women are women, and this and that, and blah, blah, blah. So you have to change the way you use the English language to, hey, no. And be ready. Are they going to call you hateful? Yeah. It's like, and feel free to explain yourself. Listen, I don't hate anybody. I respect trans people as human beings enough that I can tell them if I think they're full of shit. And I expect them to tell me if they think I'm full of shit. And maybe we're going to argue. That's okay. That's what families do. They argue sometimes. We're all family. It's okay. It's okay. But the answer is no. No. My 7-year-old daughter is in that bathroom, and yo, you kind of look like a woman, but you got a 5 o'clock shadow, and you're like, hey, man, you ain't going in there. It's like, I don't know what to tell you, brother. You got to wait. The answer is no.
I dare say Gordon would take the same attitude.
Well, I would hope so. But the thing is, one other thing, as you mentioned Gordon again, I noticed that his Gordon Ramsay would exhort people to lead in their spheres, right? So he'd talk to the general manager, right? And he would say, listen, you're the general manager. What are you doing? Like get in there and lead, you're front of house, right? Right. You're the maitre d' or whatever, like be a maitre d'. You're the expediter. Call out these orders. Okay. You're the head chef. Talk to your guys. An order comes in. Hey, call it out. What, and get into that whole, right. So, and one can, not everyone can lead someone else, but everyone who is not on autopilot is leading someone at the, and at the smallest level, you're leading yourself. You are commanding yourself, because self-command is before you, I'm always harping about family and civilization. I mean, this is the point about family and civilization. This family is where you learn self-command. And you learn self-command because you learn to submit to legitimate authority within the family. And that's important because, of course, one day you're not going to be subject to the instructions of your parents. In fact, one day, absent, putting aside, potential law breaking, and even putting aside what you do at work, when you move out and you're on your own, you're not subject to anyone's authority but your own. Now, what kind of person will you become if you can't command yourself? What kind of person will you become if you can't say, yeah, I want to do this, but I'm going to do that? Where are you going to learn that? You see? So the ability to command oneself is key. Because if I can command myself, then that means, whether I'm having a bad day, whether I'm doing whatever my problem is at that moment, if I'm a line cook in that kitchen and my chef just called out the order, I'm going to be like, yes, chef. You see what I'm saying? And I'm going to hit it, man. I'm going to execute. I'm commanding myself. I'm governing my passions. That's what it means to be virtuous.
Yeah. And I dare say you feel a sensation of achievement.
Just getting through that, just getting through a day like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now here's the thing. That person may not be a quote unquote natural leader, but the person who can at least do that is someone who at least could be fit to lead. You see what I'm saying? And look, some people are not inclined to lead. Some people are happy to just go. That's fine. But I'm just saying, like, we're talking about how leaders can emerge. It's like, well, first of all, what is it's like from the foundation of that is the bedrock of yourself, and that you yourself are sitting on some kind of bedrock, and the foundation you rest on also has to be supernatural. Sorry, it just is. That's life, but yeah, the ability to command yourself, to understand that you have a purpose, and maybe your life's purpose is to find that purpose. But you are here for some reason, and that your existence in the world and your relationship to other people in the world is a sacred thing. It means something. It must be respected. It must not be interfered with in certain ways. Your fellow human being is sacred. He must not be interfered with in certain ways. That's critical. Okay, and all this talk about markets and this and that, what have you, is the flip side of the Marxist cant that we hear from the lefties, and they're both poison. They're both wrong. So we should reject them both.
Yeah, of course I agree with you, mate. Now let's wrap it up there.
Yeah.
Put a lid on it. Being that we started with Gordon, let's just leave with a few of his quotes. Copyright reasons, I can't play him actually boiling them out, but he said things like, "You added so much salt and pepper, I can hear the dish singing, push it." He said, "My gran could do better, and she's dead." He said, "The minute you start compromising for the sake of massaging somebody's ego, that's it, game over."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "I don't like looking back. I'm constantly looking forward. I'm not one to sit and cry over spilt milk. I'm too busy looking for the next cow."
I like that.
He said, "F you, you fat, useless sack of Yankee Doodle dandy shite. Now do yourself a favour and off." And lastly, "You won't cut the mustard if you cut the corners."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I wanted to, if you have time, I wanted to just run through very quickly why exactly, just point by point, very fast, why I think Ramsay nails Foundationism 100%.
Okay.
So the Foundationist Manifesto, let's go. See deeply, right? Open your eyes and observe what is actually happening in your restaurant, in your kitchen staff, what have you. Don't deceive yourself, in other words, right? Avoid self-deception, right? And see underneath things, right? See what's behind the surface or underneath the surface, right? Listen closely. That's self-explanatory. You have to listen to your customers, right? Your customers are the people who are telling you ultimately if you're doing well. No excuse will cut it if your customers don't like the food. So when the customers don't empty their plates, when they stop coming, they're telling you something. What are they saying? You got to find out. You got to listen closely. Reason honestly. You've got to be honest with yourself about why you're doing things in the first place, right? Why are you doing this? Why are you running a restaurant? For what purpose? Might you be better doing something else? Why are you working in the kitchen? Are you here for the money? Are you here for the reason honestly with yourself about those things? Speak clearly. You have to communicate. The front of house has to communicate clearly with the kitchen. People have to come back, call those orders. They have to be clear. The chef has to say what he's doing and say what's on his mind so that people can coordinate around his activities, and his staff knows what's going on so they can function as a unit. And you see him doing, prodding people to do this again and again. Okay, next one is act bravely. Okay, you have to take a risk. Very often in a Kitchen Nightmares, you'll see he'll tackle the kitchen, he'll tackle the timing and the speed of the execution, simplify the menu, but he'll also often be like, look, we have to rebrand this place because the paint job is outrageous, or it's just dull, or it just it's uninviting, whatever. But very often he'll say we got to do a refurbishment, a rebrand, a relaunch, okay, and that's scary. And there's nothing for it. You just have to be brave because it's a risk. You're in the risk business, for God's sake. You run a restaurant, so act bravely. Deny the self. When you're told you don't cut it, or when you're told you're not cutting it, it hurts. even, when you're told that like this food that you're making is terrible, or when you like this business that you sunk everything into is failing, it's dying, and it's your fault because you're on the hook because you're the leader, that hurts. Okay. And you have to, and the part of yourself that wants to run away from that, you have to deny the self. You have to sit your ass down in that chair and listen so you can face things and then hopefully fix them. You might not fix them even if you do sit there and face it, because again, more than half of all new restaurants fail. But if you don't face it, you haven't got a shot. So deny the self. Defend the individual. Okay. The individual customer, right, is sacred. Right, that person, you're in business to serve that person. The individual employee, that person is also sacred, because no matter how good your idea is, you're not going to have a restaurant without staff. So you got to respect those. You got to defend them against whatever, against you yourself as potentially a bad leader, and against anything else that's happening. You got to right, defend them, defend your staff, defend your customers, against the dysfunction that is always threatening to creep in around the edges, right? Respect tradition. Okay. Listen to people who know better and have been there before, and to the extent you're cooking traditional dishes, well, these things have a tradition. That there's rituals, there's ways to do things. It doesn't mean you have to follow tradition, but you have to respect tradition as such. Understand that tradition is there for a reason, and the tradition is very often a set of solutions to problems that we've all forgotten about. But if you get rid of the solution, the problem comes back. So respect tradition. Face the present. Obviously, what's going on right now? How much money you bringing in week to week? Okay. Don't tell me about, you had a Michelin star 10 years ago, or you did this, or you got written up in this magazine or whatever. What are we doing right now? Because why am I here? Is the restaurant failing or not? If you're doing fine, then we don't have anything to talk about. If we're not doing fine, then face the present. What's going on? What's wrong? And that's the thing. Face the present doesn't mean face what's great about the present. It means face what's wrong, because that's what the problem is, and that's what you got to fix. And the last one is cultivate the future. The future is not you're not just a passenger on some ship that's sailing into the future. You're cultivating the future. And I use the word cultivate, by the way, in the manifesto advisedly, purposely, because that's an agricultural term, because that's what the future, it's something that you grow. You plant seeds and you husband away and you take care and you maintain and you keep watch. And then the future grows out of that all the time. And it's like, and that's what you do for the rest of your life, and if enough of us do that well, okay, then we get the amazing good fortune, right, of leaving this earth and knowing that our kids get to solve better and higher quality problems than the ones we had to solve. So that's it. And that's why I like Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah, mate, you nailed it. He nails it. And it turns out Gordon is a foundationist. So that's a fact as well. Thank you very much for this chat.
Thank you,
Learned
brother.
a lot as usual, and can't wait till the next time. Cheers, mate.
Always a good time, man. Thanks.
Ta-ra, mate.